Car?
Cars and drive-bys, it's motion detected. I'm like,
Oh, you have like a block,
You have a view.
change.
but it's, the way it is, other than looking at this, the sidewalk coming in, it's a good.
All set.
And I'm like, I don't know why you get them all the time, like, I get all these motion, then I turned off the alerts, and then I got nothing, even people around the door, I'm like. Okay,
So you can change how far out it senses. So like we used to have it, like how many feet is your front yard?
it's not far, from my front door to the street's shorter than this, and I don't have a very big front yard.
But I mean, you can do like less than 15 feet. Your yard is more than 15 feet, right? Yeah, you can do less than 15 feet or right at 15 feet, and then you shouldn't get the cars. Now, how Tyler set that up for us, I have no idea, but I know that he did.
When you go on there, it's like, they have like a little. They
Yeah,
got
it
it,
has
and you have to
that.
like pull it in and show exactly, like stop at the curb and just give me motion at the curb or give me motion at my grass. Like you just pull it, and you drag it and tell it.
Hmm. Anything tech related, I'm not in charge of. Me either. Okay. Did you find it tonight? Is it pulled up?
I did not ask him to send it to me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, and if it's after we're done here, you can just email it to me and I'll look at it. Well, does anyone have any questions? Any pressing needs, thoughts? Do you need answered? Before we jump in?
No, I'm playing with setting my. I do like it.
It's coffee talk, it can be whatever. issue you're at.
Exactly, ring doorbell issues.
We can discuss them. Don't say we never taught you anything, okay?
This is great.
Well, do you wanna take this on the bear? Do you want me to take this on? I'm trying to think of, any issues. I would say, just an experience I had last week was I had a client, I want you guys to remember that we have the bank statement loan options and when it's a good use, because I had someone getting pre-approved, she had been approved a year ago, pre-approved with someone else, she was sent to me from her sister whose loan I just did. So she's like, well, I was pre-approved a year ago, but I need to update it, blah, 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 there's a house I like. So she actually owns 4 different businesses. And so I explained the process to her, she did her online application, she sent me all the tax returns, corporate and personal for the last 2 years. Last year, 2021, taxes were good, she showed a lot of income, probably about 140,000 or so. But 2022's tax returns, she was negative, so all of her business showed losses. Which was great for her tax bill that year, but I had to explain to her that, she basically is showing no income that I can use on the loan. Now, she pays herself W-2, so she's like, well, I get 80 grand a year in a W-2 salary. Even though she gets that, we still have to look at all the business returns, and if all those businesses are negative, I have her 80 grand salary, and I have to deduct all of the losses. So essentially, her 80 grand was wiped out by the business losses, so she's really showing nothing for income. So from a year ago, once she filed the next tax returns with all the losses, very, very different. She was pre-approved last year, she's not now. However, we have a bank statement loan, and this is exactly the kind of client that it's for. So she's making money, okay, she's got businesses, she's everything's documented, she's just documenting a lot of losses, a lot of write-offs. So for her, we can go ahead and do a 12-month bank statement loan where we're getting her business bank statement and we're showing the cash flow. That's what a bank statement loan does. So we can see that she's getting the money. She's got profits listed on her tax return, so you can see the cash coming in. But then, of course, she's got a lot of expenses and specific things she wrote off, so those don't really apply. So when we do that bank statement loan, we're doing a cash flow analysis on her bank accounts instead. And then there is an expense ratio, the standard is 50%, so if she's pulling in, 200,000 for the year through her bank statements, then I'm using 100,000 for her income. If her expense ratio is not that high, or her CPA could say, no, it's actually more like 30% and send me a letter, I get to change it to that. So just remember that if you've got self-employed people, clients who own companies and, yes, the rate is higher and we have this conversation next. So currently rates are about 7.5. Well, bank statement loan, any of the portfolio loans, you're probably looking at 1 to 2% higher. So she'd be in the 9s on a bank statement loan. And, you look at that and what she's wanting to buy, that's about $500 a month higher in a payment on interest. However, she paid nothing in taxes last year. So she could go another year, make sure she shows a lot of income, not write stuff off, so that she has an income tax, she's got an income for the year, and then we can do a conventional loan next year. Or she could be like, well, what I'm writing off is working for me, my tax bill is thousands of dollars less on the IRS, and I might be paying, what is that, $6,000 a year more in interest. The offset of that, she is still better off with her 9% bank statement loan and her low to no income on her taxes. So, don't let that, oh, well, yes, the rate is higher, it is, but we gotta look at your situation as a whole. How do you get into the 7.5% loan? By showing $150,000 on your taxes and paying the taxes required on that, versus showing 0 and having a loan that's 2% higher, you're still way, way, way better off. So, that was kind of like a textbook experience of, hey, you're not qualified conventional because of this, but we have this for you. So just kind of let that be, in the back of your mind, especially as people are, I want to say, looking to show it. Everyone's always looking to show the least amount on their taxes. But I feel like everyone's squeezed more and more. They're really going for that, so.
And that's a good example of why working with you guys is important. Because if you're working with like a big bank lender, they might not be quite as helpful in showing the different products that they have.
And they probably don't have it. So a lot of lenders, we're one of very few that has those kind of products in-house, meaning NewRez, our parent company, that's our product. So there are other lenders out there that will actually broker to NewRez for that loan. So, and years ago, before we were partnered with NewRez, as Shelter, we had the option, we had that product as a brokered out product. I did one and I was like, I am never doing that again. It was just a horrible experience because you're dealing with the lender that actually has the product, right? And at that time, this was like 8 years ago, that was Angel Oak. It was horrific. But now we have them and we've had them for like the last 5 years. So it's still us. So we're in-house, we're not sending it out to someone else. And we've got the decision makers, we've got, access to exceptions, things like that. So, yeah, you will not find that many places at all.
It can be difficult working with a mortgage broker sometimes, and I know that, I'm sure there's amazing ones out there that have great lenders, but I find it's very confusing for the people in the transaction, because they're used to working with y'all, where the loan officer can get all the information that's needed, and you're like a good point of contact. But when you're brokering a loan out, your loan officer is not actually an employee of who's lending the money. And so there's a huge time lag in getting answers. And when the loan officer actually works for the lender, they can get those answers quicker, and you have an actual person to communicate with the lender. When you work with a broker, you probably never talk to the lender at all. So if there's an issue, it's gonna be longer for you to figure out what the issue is, longer to get it resolved. My one where the guy took out a $500,000 line of credit, that whole thing, that was broker.
Yeah.
So I'm a little sore on that topic.
Yeah.
Like I said, there's good ones out there, but I find it's confusing for a lot of the parties, and they don't understand what the difference is, both agents, a lot of the agents, and then also the buyer and the seller. So when you say, oh, we talked to the broker, but you have to talk to the lender, it's always, I thought they were the lender. It's the difference, and I don't know that that's common knowledge, and therefore it gets really confusing for people anyway.
Yeah, and you do. Obviously, as a broker, you lose the control aspect, and you're sending the loan to another lender. So that lender, the broker really can care about their client, and I'm sure they do, but the lender doesn't really. The lender is doing the loan for the broker. They have no idea who the client is. They're not invested in that, and the person actually borrowing the money, they don't really care if their service is great for that person.
Right.
So, you do lose a lot with that, having that middleman. Even if the middleman broker is great, you still agree.
Yeah, exactly. One thing that I've been seeing is still confusion on condos. What condos are, how we classify them, why that's relevant. If you have a listing agent who advertises a fee simple property, but then there are condo documents that go with that, what do we think most likely happened? Most likely, the listing agent didn't pull the deed to see whether it was a condo or not, and they looked at the structure, or they just asked their seller, what kind of property is this? And they say, oh, it's a townhome, so they list it as a townhome. Pull those deeds to see what's gonna be definitive is what the actual language in the legal description says. If there's any reference to a declaration of condominium, it is a condo, period. No matter what the listing says, that's what's definitive, that's how it's deeded. And that's different from fee simple, because a condo means you own everything inside the walls. You don't own the exterior walls, you don't own the grass, none of that. Fee simple, like as they teach it to us in law school, is you own from the center of the earth to the heavens in your little piece of land. And so some states like take out mineral rights and whatnot, but Georgia's not one of those. So you own everything as far up and as far down as you can see. But with a condo, since you don't even own the walls, you don't own that. So deeding those two things is a different type of ownership, okay? And I see that a lot when it's like a townhome and, well, you've got the townhome look, I guess I should say, but it's deeded as a condo. So you can't look at a building and know how it's deeded.
They can
So-
even be called XYZ townhomes,
Yes,
but still be condos,
yes,
so.
yes. So sometimes that happens because someone creates the neighborhood, they get it all set up, they name it whatever townhome, because that's how it's deeded, then they convert them to being condos. Well, they don't wanna go change the name, there's not really a reason to change the name other than to avoid confusion during a purchase or sale kind of thing. So properties can get converted into being a condo. So we see that happening sometimes, which is fine, as long as it's done properly, it's really nothing to worry about. But it does change how you list it, because if you are the listing agent, it's very easy to figure it out. So, you know, I tell y'all, if you have a listing, ask me to pull the deed. If you're about to write an offer, ask me to pull the deed, because you wanna know who you're supposed to be working with, what the property is, what the documents are that are correct to put up to make part of your contract. So just be careful with that. I don't wanna say argument, because it sounds not very nice, this person is my friend and he's great, but a little bit of an argument over whether a property was a condo or a townhome. And what can happen is even with a townhome, the insurance policy can be for the whole building, right? So if you have the townhome look and you've got them all like squished together, right? They're all touching, but they're all like 2 to 4 story little buildings. Touching, looks like a townhome. You can deed it as a townhome, but they might still take out like an overarching policy, like a condo policy. If you have a condo, then the HOA has to have some sort of overarching policy that covers the whole building, because you as the owner, you don't own any part of the actual structure of the building, you just own what's inside the walls. So you have to also insure the walls themselves, right? So the HOA has this master policy, they call it. And it typically says like condo coverage, like sometimes townhomes will pull out this same policy. And that's fine, but just because there's a condo policy, a master policy, doesn't mean the property is deeded as a condo. And so I think that's important to know too, because I don't know that all insurance agents know that, and certainly the one I was talking to didn't know that, because the deed 100% said it was a condo, like it absolutely definitively was a condo, but because it had this it was a townhome, but because it had the condo policy, he was convinced it was a condo. So just know what is the absolute end story, how the property is deeded, that's what's definitive, nothing else. So I don't know if y'all see that coming up, but.
No, well, that's always been a thing for us, you know, as the lender getting a contract. You know, deciding if it's a townhouse or if it's a condo, and then if it's not clear in there and if there isn't a deed. That's always what I would do, is reach out to the attorney and say, can you pull the deed, because I need to know.
Yeah.
I need to know if you know, we've gotta get the condo docs back ASAP, because those condo docs have to be ordered as quick as possible. So knowing if it is a condo, we need to know from the get-go, this is a condo, we need to order these docs. Here's the, you know, that community association disclosure is so vital in the early days, especially with quick closes and stuff. We've got to get that ordered as soon as we can, because we're at the mercy of that management company as far as how quickly they move, or how long it takes to return the docs that we're ordering online. So the sooner the better. So like Ashley said, obviously the very best, if you're listing it, or if you're the buyer's agent and you're making an offer, make sure you ask for that, you know, let's get the deed as part of that contract, so we know this is exactly what it is.
And if you have a conventional loan and it's a condo, what do you always, always, always need to do to help your lender and your buyer out? What should be in 100% of your condo conventional loan contracts?
The condo step.
Exactly. I think it's 528. And so that is essentially just the contingency saying if the lender can't get the docs or can't get it approved in whatever time frame you fill in, then the buyer can terminate the contract. So I think it's really important that that makes it in there, and that'll give you brownie points with the lender as well. Because a lot of times, you know, keep in mind, the lender can ask for everything exactly when they should, like the second they get the information. But if the condo itself, like the HOA, is not cooperative, there's nothing that the lender can do about that. And there's really not anything anybody can do about that. I mean, the seller or the listing agent can call the HOA and say, hey, I need you to provide this information. But really, other than begging them to do it, there's nothing that can happen, and it's gonna be the buyer who suffers and loses the earnest money if the financing contingency comes and goes and they have not answered the question yet. Because a lender can't deny a loan simply because they haven't heard from the condo, right? You have to actually see that the docs are bad. Right? Or can you?
No, I think we can, because we can't, if we don't have an approval, if we cannot approve the property, so if we're missing information in order to approve it, they'll just decline it.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I always heard it was-
Yeah, from what I understand. But that's why we're always asking for that STIP, you know, back in the day when we used to, you know, it was normal to have like 21-day contingency. You know, you usually get, but, you know, even then, if they were slow to respond, or if we could get the initial docs, but if there were questions or we needed further information, conditions, they call them, then that's dealing directly with the management company, like, hey, I've got your policy on insurance, but you know, there should be another writer or this or that, something that they have to provide. That's when you run into, it can really get in the weeds, because if they're not, some of these management companies are so poorly run, it's terrible, and they just don't seem to mind, they don't care.
Well, and some HOAs don't have management companies, and so if it's run just by like a group of volunteers, then that can sometimes be real easy, because they'll spit it back.
Yeah.
Sometimes because less red tape, sometimes it can be more difficult, because they're like, hey, we have full-time jobs, we don't really have time to deal with your problem.
Yeah, they might look at their email for days,
Right.
you know, stuff like that, but.
So-
Yeah, the STIP just protects everybody though, and it certainly makes it easier. I don't think I've ever, honest myself, been in a position where nobody responded, like at all, to your point, to where it's like, we have nothing to be able to make a decision, so.
Yeah, well, it does happen, or you
Yeah.
get like some of the docs, but not all
Yeah.
of it, because I get calls about it. I'm not gonna say often, but enough to where it's worth cautioning you guys about. And I think from the seller perspective, yes, it's one more contingency. You of course want it to be longer than your financing contingency, because if you have your financing contingency, you can pretty much handle it within that time frame. But as we shorten timeframes, having this much more narrow contingency is gonna be good. And from the listing perspective, you need to know whether that condo is approvable or not anyway, because if it's an issue with lender A and buyer A, it's probably gonna be an issue with lender B and buyer B as well. So to have that information and get that is still helpful. And then if for whatever reason it does terminate, at least you know that HOA has the information ready to spit back out when you do go under contract again. Because theoretically, it shouldn't take as long for the exact same property. So, it's not a super scary one on the list side, not one that I would say, oh, we should definitely get rid of that. Only time it's not relevant is if you find a cash buyer. Right, and for your FHA loans, it's already a contingency in the contract that the condo has to get approved, so as far as they only need it for conventional. But I know there's still a lot of confusion on condos, at least that I'm seeing.
Yeah, and the whole Florida condo collapse didn't help as far as the approvals go. So I feel like they do ask for more things, it seems, more than they used to. Especially in terms of anything structural or any kind of maintenance on the community itself, so just be aware of that. You know, if you go to list it and your seller is like, yeah, well, we're voting on this, whatever, because we have this work to do or X, Y, Z needs to be done. Just kind of not red flag, but just kind of keep in the back, okay, this may have more going on than just a standard, condo approval, delinquencies and this and that, all the basic questions. Because if anything comes up on that questionnaire about, they like to categorize it as deferred maintenance, but if there's anything maintenance related to that property that is going to be done, they will probably dig for more information. Is it deferred maintenance? If not, when's it gonna be done? How is it gonna be paid? What date will it be completed? Like, they wanna know a lot because they're very, very, aware that they wanna make sure the structure of these places are, very sound since, what happened in Florida. So yes, we definitely see a tightening on that. And it seems like Freddie Mac is a little more particular than Fannie Mae, which is in direct. Unfortunately, our Borrow Smart loan that we tell you guys about all the time, that is a Freddie Mac product. So if we've got someone using Borrow Smart that's a condo, we're letting them know at the beginning, hey, this means the condo has to be approved. We're letting our buyers know about the condo approval process and just, that there are two different entities, Fannie or Freddie, and they do the basics of their condo approvals are the same, like the delinquency ratios, things like that. But, the things that tend to be, I don't wanna say more subjective, but where one might dig a little more than another, the way they use some of those answers, Freddie tends to be more stringent. So sometimes we'll be like having a hard time getting a property approved with the Freddie approval, and we can do it Fannie. So if we have to switch those borrowers to get them into the place, they'll lose that Borrow Smart option with the $3,000. So, but we're always trying. We're certainly always trying Freddie first for those. But just know that, if people are asking, well, why is it, what's the big deal? What is it a problem? You can always go back to, if there's any work or structural stuff to be done, blame it on what happened in Florida, that they've really tightened up with how they're reviewing things based on that event.
And keep in mind, there's a separate seller's property disclosure for a condo. So we've all seen our regular seller's property disclosure, but again, as a listing agent, if you've pulled the deed, it's a condo, have your seller fill out the condo seller property disclosure. Because there are questions on there as far as how old the building is. Because sometimes when you look at something, how I was saying earlier that a property can be like reclassified or transitioned into a condo. So what some people will do is, let's say the building was built in 1975, but in 2001, they turn them into condos. People will list 2001 as the date because they know that it became a condo in 2001. But what the lender really wants to know to be able to approve that loan is what was the structure though? Because they don't care when you change the deed as far as is that building gonna collapse or not. They need to know it was built in 1975, right? You need to know that it was built in 1975 for lead-based paint stuff as well. So just understand the difference there, but that condo special stipulation is set up to ask some of those questions rather than just a general seller's property disclosure. So you've got 3 options really, when looking at the seller's property disclosure, regular for 95% of your deals, you've got the condo for your condos, and then you also have that very truncated one where you're just listing out what those hidden or latent defects are. So for your people who are maybe doing estates or for your people who are investors, and they're like, I've literally never even touched the house, I have no idea what defects there are, I wanna sell it as is, I'm not disclosing anything. Still encourage them to fill out the latent defects, disclosure form, because it's not obligating them to do anything that is greater than what the law already requires of them. So as a seller, you can't say, oh, I know there used to be mold behind the wall and I just painted over it, so now nobody can see it. No inspector is gonna go scrape paint off of every wall to see if there's mold. That's not a thing that you should expect of them. That is a classic hidden defect. It doesn't matter if you put as is, it doesn't matter whether you have disclosures, your seller has to disclose that. You might as well use that form, and it comes with a fixtures checklist, because it doesn't matter whether you've ever touched the house, you know whether you're taking the fridge out of it. Right, so that entire form, there's really no reason why a seller shouldn't fill that out, if they don't know anything about the property. If they've lived there, they should use one of the other forms. But just keep in mind that all three are options, and all three are for different scenarios, depending on what your listing looks like.
Another reminder I'll have, this happened to us, last week, I think, is, I know we say it all the time, but I feel like we can just keep reminding y'all all the time, but always, always, always send us any new amendments as quickly as you can. So obviously the exhibits and stuff, when the contract is written, we need all of it, every single piece of it, just like the attorney does. So don't hold anything back or be like, oh, this isn't important, just send it. And then amendments as they come. It doesn't matter if you're just, you know, I don't even know. I can't think of something that would be completely irrelevant, but
Totally irrelevant to you guys might be like, hey, we thought this seller was selling in their trust, but now they're selling individually. Cause you don't care how
Yeah.
the seller sells it. I
something.
care a lot.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
so it doesn't matter, don't look at any amendment that's written and think, oh, I don't think, they don't need to know that, that has nothing to do with money. I won't send it to the lender. Like, always send it to us, because we have to have all of it, as does Ashley, for a complete contract, and if we don't get it, obviously the most, I don't know, the one that can cause the most issues would be the ATAC, as far as we're concerned. Well, one, obviously, if anything changes sales price wise, or the seller's gonna contribute to our closing costs, you know, those people usually send to us, you know, pretty quickly, because they know, well, we're the money people, so we need that.
But not always. Sometimes we're balancing.
Oh, yeah, that is true. It does happen. It does
I have a sales price.
So just remember, any amendment, whether you're, you know, like Ashley said, changing the name of the trust or something, or on the seller side, or something about the seller, if there's an amendment, and it's a numbered amendment, it's added to that contract, we need it. We had an ATAC that we received the day before closing that, we had to deal with. So just remember, anything on an ATAC, if there's anything to be repaired, and if it says, one, if it's anything somewhat major, like if it has to do structurally or something, even if you don't say receipts, we're gonna want some kind of proof to show it was done. Because remember, anything that goes into that contract on an ATAC, it's basically saying, in order to close, these things have to be completed, where we as a lender, we're looking at that contract, we have to make sure those are completed before we lend the money on it. Because it's in the contract, so make sure we get those, the sooner the better, you know. Remember, we as your loan officers are kind of your filter. I have sent ATACs back to agents and said, okay, hey, let's reword this, or let's take this out, let's take out, you know, they're gonna give $5,000 in lieu of repairs, let's just take out in lieu of repairs, we don't want those words in there. Y'all know that it's in lieu of repairs, the buyer knows it's in lieu of repairs, the seller knows they're not doing anything, they're giving money. We don't need those words in there, because as soon as that goes to an underwriter, they're gonna say, what repairs? What needed to be done that's not gonna get done? So they're gonna open that can of worms, so. We will definitely, so we're your filter, think of us as your filter. If you've got questions about should I put this in an ATAC, should I not, how should I word this? Call us when you're writing it, we are happy to walk you through it. Sometimes you just have to say what it is, you know, if there's a fear of mold behind a wall, or there's mold somewhere, and they want that, you know, remedied and cleaned out, then, you know, you're gonna have to put mold in there. And obviously, when the word mold is in that contract, there's going to have to be remediation, we're going to have some kind of letter from the company that took care of the mold, stating it is gone, or it wasn't there, if it's a fear of mold. That's gonna be a requirement, but, you know, we don't wanna we don't wanna go around stuff to the point of you're putting your borrower at jeopardy or something's not getting done on the house, so. I don't mean to say, don't ever say something that looks bad in an ATAC, let's talk through it, let's word it the best way we can, but. We'll help you understand, okay, if you say this, this and this and this need to happen after. That way you just know, this is the process. But, we're getting that ATAC, a week into the contract instead of 3 weeks into the contract, we have plenty of time to make sure everybody knows what's going on. And we can make sure that that's okay, if you go back and say, okay, if I put this in, this is what it's gonna be. Go back and talk to the other agent, whatever, I will wait to send that final ATAC in to the underwriter, so it's exactly how we want it, everyone understands it. So just know that we are here to help you, to answer questions on that. We want it to be right, we want it to be, benefiting everybody in the transaction, but we also want to make sure nobody's scrambling to get, a mold company out there to clear it and write a letter for us the day before closing, because we just got the ATAC and there was things that needed to be said. So I remember, if you're ever writing, it's done by a licensed contractor, like I want X, Y, and Z repairs completed by a licensed contractor. We've got to have proof that the contractor that completed is licensed. So if that's important to you, make sure that you're getting that proof, because we'll need that. Same with receipts, if you want receipts and things provided to the buyer, we've got to have those, so just keep all that in mind.
So the opposite's true too, right? Like I see a lot of people writing XYZ by a licensed contractor. If it's like caulking the toilet, do you really need a licensed plumber? Or is it totally fine if the seller does it? And 99.9% of the time, it's totally fine if the seller does it. Or, mending little holes where you took the picture out and put a little caulk, swipe some paint on it. You don't really need a license to be able to do that, but as soon as you put that word in there, exactly like Aaron said, the lender has the right to ask for the license. And so your seller, whether you represent the buyer or the seller, you still don't want the seller to be pissed at you or the lender, because now that they've done this work that you asked them to do and you are fine with it, lenders requiring a license, someone with a license has to come in and do that and has to get paid for the contract. The seller, I'm sure it's set up to where the seller's gonna pay for it. They're gonna be so upset that they spent their time doing it, but they still have to go pay someone else to come in and look at it, undo it, and redo it. So use that really just when you need. And there's a lot of stuff where you really do want a licensed contractor, whether it's electrician, plumber, contractor in general. A lot of stuff you really do want that, but some stuff you don't. So don't always put that in there. And I would say make it a habit of calling Aaron before you get the ATAC signed, because technically, as soon as it's signed, it's part of the contract, and you need another amendment to fix what you put in the ATAC. So if it's already signed, now if you replace it with another ATAC, who's gonna know? A fair point, but if the other side says, no, we have this other part of the contract, they are correct. So you really want to make sure that that's all settled before you get it signed, fully executed, so that way it's not actually part of your contract. Because both the attorney and the lender need the whole thing, which includes the bad ATAC, if you had it executed, or fully executed before sending it in. So just kind of be mindful of that.
Yeah, so you can, if you want to write it up and send it to me before, like, I should say, I have agents do that all the time. It's, but if it's anything, if it's a basic ATAC, obviously you don't have to do that, but if you're like concerned, like, okay, these are the things we want done, this is how I'm writing it up, should I change the way I'm writing anything, or, and then I can look at it, and it may not be that you need to change anything, but it could be like, okay, well, if you say it this way, I'm gonna need this, or this, if you do, and if you're cool with that, great. At least everyone's on the same page, or you'd be like, well, that's not really that important, or like Ashley's saying, it's really not something, I know I have an handyman, a lot of agents have handyman, that they kind of know, and they may not be licensed. So it's like, hey, if you know you've got a good person and you're cool with them doing it, let's take out the license here. These are drywall repairs, or this or that, it's not, plumbing or electricity where you should have a licensed person maybe, So just things like that, we're just trying to help y'all streamline it, but make sure that everything's done early enough. We know about everything. There's no surprises. That's always the goal, because then everything is smooth sailing.
Yeah, and wording makes a huge difference. Like y'all might have heard me talk about this example, but we had one where the ATAC essentially said seller to remove mold in kitchen. And the M word there, it's a big deal. you know, the lender was like, we need this remediation, blah, 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 from the underwriter, big deal. What it really was that the ice bucket in the fridge had mold in it. You don't really need remediation for that. What they could have said is seller to clean fridge and replace ice bucket in fridge. Same end goal, right? They get the mold out, they get a new ice bucket, but you don't use the N word to create the havoc there. So the way you word it can have a huge impact. And I would also caution y'all to not incorporate the inspection report into your
Oh,
APAC.
God, no.
I see that all the time. Couple issues with that. First, as soon as you incorporate it, the lender is entitled to see the entirety of the inspection report because you've incorporated it into that ATAC. Now, the entire inspection is part of the contract. So
We
maybe
do not want that.
you do not want that, because there could be things that the buyer, maybe the buyer's a handyman, and they're totally gonna go fix this later, they're not worried about it. But the lender sees this issue, like maybe some of the deck is rotting away, feels kind of structural, feels like a big danger issue. Could be a problem, they see that, now they might require that get fixed to lend the money. And keep in mind, what the lender wants, the lender gets, is a great general rule, but the lender can't force the seller to agree to anything. So if you incorporate the inspection report, and the lender says, hey, I know this is not in your ATAC, but we've reviewed this, we want this done to lend the money. If the seller says, no, I'm not doing that, the lender says, well, I'm not loaning money if you don't do it, what happens? The buyer loses their earnest money, right? So just be careful, you don't wanna be the cause of the buyer losing the earnest money because you structured it to incorporate the entire inspection report. The other couple issues I see with that are sometimes people will say, fixed item, you know, picture 2.4 in the inspection report. And I think I've told this story a couple times, but I had one that said that, but the inspection had 2.4 pictures because there was like a typo in the inspection. One was like replacing one piece of wood, the other picture was replacing the entire deck. Obviously, the buyer wanted the deck replaced, obviously the seller replaced the one little piece of wood, and that was such a headache at closing because the seller did what they were supposed to do, but the buyer didn't get what they asked for, so that's problematic. Also problematic with that is your inspection reports are not structured to be actions, they're structured to list problems. And so if you just say, first off, don't ever say seller to address, because we know addressing could literally be like, yep, I do concur that there is a crack there. Check, I've addressed it. Not ever what you need, right? Give the action on who is supposed to really do what with that issue laid out. But the inspection report will say, like, crack in drywall, not seller to have, and I don't know if you need a license for drywall, like cracks or stucco crack. Seller to have licensed stucco person fix crack in whatever it is. You know, put the actual person and the action you want, and your inspection reports are not structured like that. They're just structured to give you the information on what could be wrong with the property, not necessarily always how to fix it. So just figure out what the issue is, and then in the ATAC, just list out exactly what you want either the seller to do or the seller to hire someone else to do for you, and just avoid incorporating it in completely.
Yeah,
I agree. And one more thing on ATACs, and all you're gonna do is do a seller credit. Don't do an ATAC, just do a regular old amendment. So maybe you've drafted an ATAC and the listing agent says, you know what, my seller doesn't actually wanna do any of that. They just wanna give you money so that you can do it. And you say, you know, talk to my buyer, that's fine with them. You decide on the amount. Instead of redoing the ATAC, amendment 1. You know, seller credit is $8,000, period. And the reason I say that, it's kind of the same idea, is that in lieu of repairs, when you have an ATAC, what that is an amendment to address concerns. So if you put on this amendment to address concerns, seller's gonna give the buyer $8,000, a very natural question for the lender to ask is, okay, what concern are these $8,000 addressing? So just do a regular old amendment, you're gonna get less questions, run into less issues when you do that.
agreed.
Yeah, that's my word vomit on inspections.
ATAC, they're so much fun.
Hmm.
I'm trying to think of something else I've experienced that recently.
I have a question for you guys. So this goes back to the condos. I just literally got a phone call. I'm supposed to close on my trouble con tomorrow, and got a message from the lender saying that, and I think Ashley, you probably both are well aware of it, that there was a special assessment on the table for that condo for $3,200. And the HOA letter came back to the lender without saying anything about the special assessment. So
Wait, sorry, the HOA info to the lender or the HOA closing letter to the attorney? 'Cause that's two separate pieces of information.
to the lender.
Okay, it wouldn't necessarily always be on that. The closing letter that the attorney gets is gonna be what has like the money stuff, as far as like doing closing kind of stuff, most of the time.
So the lender's underwriter wants us to strike through the assessment on the CAD, the special assessment on the CAD.
So you're saying that the lender questionnaire that the lender ordered from the HOA did not mention the assessment,
Yes,
but the assessment is mentioned in your CAD.
yes,
So the lender's saying, we want you to strike it?
Well, the
yes.
other important question there is, what does the HOA closing letter say?
No idea.
Okay, cause that's
It
gonna be.
literally just came up while I'm listening to your call.
Okay,
That's crazy though, because he's had that for so long. Well, I'm just thinking like, that's how you get a condo approval is with that, and they would have had the contract the entire time. Sorry.
so I think what's gonna be determinative in how you handle that is what the assessment actually is. And I think kind of the happy medium there, instead of striking through it, get to closing and you can just do an amendment at closing. That way it doesn't actually change what the parties have, because the way the CAD is set up, and I mean, from the listing, because this is your listed condo, right?
Yes,
The problem, yeah. So from the listing side, it might not hurt you for everyone to strike through the actual amount there, but what my concern is that in, a special assessment scenario, the way the CAD is structured is that if it's under disclosed, the seller has to make up that difference, whether it's paying it at closing or whether it is, given to the buyer afterwards. So that can sometimes happen, and I think if you strike through just the number, I don't want it to be interpreted as $0. So that was
Right.
my concern from the listing side, and I would not touch that until you know what the answer is, because then your seller's just gonna have to pay more money. Could have to pay more money, depending on what the reality is, as far as the special assessment goes.
I mean, but then the underwriters won't approve they're saying they won't approve the loan.
Well, did you ask them, can we do that at closing?
I
Because
didn't.
sometimes things that are required to approve the loan, like contract stuff, can just be one of the funding documents. So, you know, when we hop up and scan stuff off in the middle of the closing, maybe one of those things can be the amendment removing that from the contract.
So I'm still a little confused. Okay, so don't strike through the CAD like the lender's asking me to do.
What I would do, Sandy, is,
How does that help?
I
Because
have
you
no
see
idea.
it, you see it, there, like, that's like the biggest no-no ever is to strike through it.
well, you can strike through an initial.
Well, I know, but I mean, like, as a lender, if I'm saying this is a problem for me, if you strike through it, it's still there. The whole thing with, as a lender, is once an underwriter sees something, they can't unsee it.
Well, I think what this lender is saying is we want the contract to match the information we have, I think is the
That's-
point.
and that's-
So
That's
striking
exactly
through
right.
that and initialing it would effectively remove it from the contract, therefore matching the paperwork that they have. So what kind of step by step, what I would do, Sandy, is one, I would ask the attorney, do you have the HOA closing letter back? Can you please send it to me? And then to the lender, I would respond saying, can we get this signed at closing and it be part of your like conditions to close? And see what they say, because if they say yes to that question, then you've removed the time crunch. You can get everything set up, that can be done at closing, all the numbers are gonna be there, and you should be fine. If they say no, then I think you wanna say, okay, no problem, we'll get it sorted, I wanna get the HOA closing letter back first, so we can make sure what the situation really is. Does that make sense?
Kind of. So essentially I need to get the HOA closing letter from the attorney, not
Mhm.
not the one that the lender got back. Because the lender's saying basically in their view right now, the only people disclosing the assessment are us. Because they didn't get anything back from the HOA saying that there's an assessment. So,
Right,
so
but
what you're
what
saying, right?
So I think that what Ashley's saying is that what you can try to do instead of striking through and changing the CAD you have is to write an amendment stating that you're removing whatever that says from the CAD. And you could write the amendment from a lender's point of view. You'll get a better answer as far as can that be a prior to funding condition, because right now the underwriter is saying, hey, prior to clearing the loan, basically, final approval, clear to
Yeah.
close. I'm not gonna get you that until this is removed.
Right.
So what you wanna ask is, hey, I don't wanna strike it from there because what I'm understanding Ashley to say is that if it's removed from there, but there really is an assessment, your seller is at risk if it was never there prior to the closing, right? Versus leaving it there, doing an amendment that gets signed at the closing table means that, hey, we're doing what the lender asked for, but we're doing it right before we fund, so there's never a chance for your seller to be on the line to give any money to the buyer because they quote, didn't disclose it because you removed it. So asking the lender, say, hey, can we do it this way? I don't wanna remove it because my seller knows it's there. Maybe even say they're not comfortable removing it prior to closing, you know what I mean? But here's what I can do is write an amendment that says we're removing it, and we'll just have it executed at closing if the lender is willing to make getting that amendment a prior to funding condition, means that they'll clear the loan, but they will not fund it at closing until they have that document. So if you write the document, send it to the loan officer and say, hey, will you ask, just don't have it executed yet. That way they'll know what it says. The underwriter can look at it and say, okay, I'm okay doing it this way. Here's an amendment that takes out what I want, but okay, I'll allow them, hopefully they'll say, okay, I understand that. I'll allow it to be signed before we release funding. So they still will not fund the loan without that executed amendment. You're just asking, can we execute it at closing? So there's no, my sellers aren't liable ever, right? For potentially quote, not disclosing it when they really did, but the lender wants to take it out.
And then what the lender wants is for it to be struck through an initial. You can do that in closing. So if that's kind of the key, instead of like an amendment is great, and what they want is just it
Yeah.
struck through an initial, that's fine, I would just ask you that at closing.
Yeah. So the words you wanna ask is, can we make that a prior to funding condition? That's what you
Okay.
wanna ask the lender.
Yeah, I think he wants it prior to clear to close, but yeah.
I will say most lenders, when they're asking for these things, they try to get it is like prior to giving clear to close, but sometimes when you push back, they'll be comfortable with it being prior to funding. So my point is, it's worth asking the question,
Yeah.
but also ask for that HOA closing letter. Because if you get that back and that closing letter doesn't have any sort of special assessment on it, then we can talk about how to structure that to keep your seller safe and kind of how you filled it out. Because I want to say, when we had talked about it, it was a under consideration type thing.
Right,
Not
it had
a,
not been
there is
approved.
one.
It was
What?
proposed. It was proposed, yeah.
Yeah, and so the other thing to tell the lender too, it could just be that they're not reading the contract exactly right, because if it's only under consideration, it's not going to show up on
HOA docs.
the HOA docs or the HOA closing letter, because it hasn't been approved yet. But you don't necessarily want the seller to strike through that and then the buyer to come back in 6 months and say, hey, you disclosed this wrong. So it might be a minute where you explain to the lender, hey, this is not what you think it is, this is why it's not on there, do you guys really need this? And if they're like, no, we gotta have it, then the amendment is probably the better option, because you don't wanna strike through your language, but the amendment could say, there is currently no approved special assessment for this property, and that will probably satisfy, or could very likely satisfy what the lender needs. And honestly, if they need it before giving clear to close, I would go the amendment route, so you can have it say exactly what you want, because then because that way you haven't touched it's been discussed but not approved type
Right.
thing. Then you're just saying there is no current HOA special assessment, period, everyone signs off, you send it, again, look at the HOA letter first, to make sure it didn't get approved, like, Friday. But then that might be the way to go and make everyone happy, which
Okay,
is under consideration.
sure. All right, this thing is a huge headache. I'm just gonna be.
I was just gonna say, this transaction is the gift that keeps giving.
It sure does. It sure does. And until we get through closing tomorrow at 10 o'clock, I'm gonna be sweating it out. My poor seller.
You're so close, you'll
I
be
hope
ready to throw down at celebration.
Yes.
Okay, thanks, ladies. I appreciate it. Literally, that call came through like as you're on the as we're on this call, and I was like, I need to ask them about this.
Well, that's good timing at least. I mean,
It was good
you have to get the call, getting the call when we're doing this and asking for issues, perfect.
True.
Sandy's bringing the mimosas tomorrow.
Yeah. Out of the back of my car.
Uh-huh. At least that's what we know is gonna be in your Stanley Cup you can bring it.
That's a great idea, great. I should have brought that instead of mashed potatoes.
Oh, yeah, way more fun. Not have any other questions or anything going on that you wanna talk about? All right. You got anything?
I don't have anything, we can end 5 minutes early if we're done.
Well, thank y'all for coming. We appreciate it. We'll see y'all tomorrow.
See you guys tomorrow.
Thank you, ladies.
Thanks. Someone's going.
What time do we begin in the morning?